You're listening to the Nacho Kids Podcast, where we discuss all things step-family related. Real stories, real people, real help. Your hosts are the creators of the Nacho Kids Method and the Nacho Kids Academy Step-Family Coaching Team, Lori and David Sims.
Just want to let y'all know there are a few places that the audio and video go kind of wonky, but bear with us. They are brief, and the material was too good. I didn't want to edit that stuff out. And there are some topics discussed that you may not want little ears to hear. Nothing horrible, but just may not want little ears to hear. All right, let's get started. Today, we have Michaela Bucchianeri again. Hey, Michaela, how are you?
Hey, Lori, I'm doing well. I had so much fun on our last episode. I'm just really happy to be back.
Yes, it's great to see you. Let's talk about emotional regulation.
Let's. It's one of my favorite topics. I could talk about this for ages. So, yeah, emotion regulation is kind of the headline message that if someone's going to just listen to 30 seconds of this episode, which I hope they stick around, and they're just going to run with one idea, I want them to recognize that emotions are not the enemy. We love emotions. Emotions are beautiful. They add color to our lives, and plot twist, they're unavoidable. But emotion regulation is about learning to work with your emotion. It's not about suppressing emotion.
Right.
So that's kind of the big core idea here that I want everyone to walk away with, is you can learn to work with your natural emotions at different points along the way, but you're never wanting to fight or stuff them down. That's when we start having extra problems coming up.
100%. And I know a lot of people will say that nachoing is just sweeping things under the rug. No, it's not. It can be viewed that way if you're not doing it right, but it's looking at that issue and giving it the proper emotional weight. And you can be mad 5 minutes. And I remember one time I did this, I was so mad about something. And I said, I'm going to be mad for 5 minutes. I set a timer. After about 30 seconds, I'm like, this is a long time.
Mm-hmm.
But if I wouldn't have done that, I'd have been mad for 2 weeks over something stupid, right? And I didn't see a lot of that until this whole nacho thing, because I had to regulate my emotions being a stepmom.
Step parents have the benefit, we'll call it that, of a crash course in emotion regulation, because for many step parents, it is truly a kind of make it or break it survival tool. You learn very quickly to regulate your emotions. And for anyone who's listening who thinks, I don't know if I can regulate my emotions very well, you have done it. It probably just felt desperate in the moment.
Right.
Like when you stormed out of the house, or you completely shut down during a conflict, or whatever it might be. You're like humming to yourself. You kind of dissociate standing in the middle of a chaotic kitchen. Those are all attempts to regulate your emotion, and it probably worked. But the point here is that there are other ways you can be working with your emotions. But yeah, I agree. Step parents learn it pretty quickly.
Well, and I think a good example is if you're at work and your boss says something that makes you mad, you don't go, well, that's stupid, right? And if it upsets you, you just don't really respond like you would if it was your partner or your kid. That's emotional regulation.
I love that example, because if we just sort of tease that out a few more logical steps, it might have felt like you were stuffing down your emotion in the moment just to get through. But chances are that energy went somewhere. You called your friend or your mom on the way home. You spoke to your spouse. You journaled. You did like a angry power walk around the neighborhood. Whatever it was, there was some way that you were bringing yourself back down to a baseline. And that is a perfectly acceptable way to regulate your emotions. But yeah, that's a really key piece of it, is you weren't just stuffing it down and hoping it would disappear. You were just sticking a pin in it because that situation, it was not an appropriate time or place to be reacting maybe the way you initially wanted to.
Right, because you'd be unemployed.
Yeah, for sure.
It was funny when you said something about the angry power walking. I'm picturing this neighborhood where there's 10 stepmoms and they're doing this angry power walking all around together.
I would 100% join that club. I might start that club. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Stepmoms, we'll have to think of a good name for it. So I know when I was younger that I had a lot of issues controlling my emotions. I would go from 0 to 120, bam. Then 10 minutes later, after I'd calmed down, I'm like, I don't understand. I don't know why that happened. Why did I react that way? And I wasn't given the tools to help me understand those emotions. So as an adult, I had to work really hard on identifying those emotions and finding the root of where they're coming from. It's not always what's in your face that's causing these emotions.
That is so true. And I think that's a really common story many of us have when we look back. Even if you were fortunate to grow up in a family where everyone spoke about emotions in these really like open and non-judgmental ways, which is not most people. Even in that case, there likely was a point where you realized I'm missing some information here. Like I'm lacking the tools or the awareness to actually work with what I'm feeling. And so I think about it in kind of two different, there's sort of two different toolboxes that you can be pulling from, and they influence one another when it comes to working with your emotions. So one is just emotional awareness, emotional vocabulary. Can you name more than 3 different emotions, right? You know, those people who are always just everything's anger or everything's sad or everything's bored, right? That comes up a ton with kids. If you can flesh out your vocabulary, just as you're trying to brush up your vocabulary, you know, in school or for something else, or if you're learning a new language, there are resources you can look to. Even really young kids can do this with their families to, you know, they have emotion charts with pictures where you just build up your ability to verbalize how you're feeling. And that's as much for your own benefit to be able to point it out to yourself. I'm feeling this type of way as it is to communicate it out loud. So that's like the emotional side of things. And then the other toolbox that I think of is learning a bit. You don't have to learn a ton, just enough to kind of be dangerous about the stress response. So our nervous systems are wired through, you know, in our inborn wiring, as well as our early experiences and all the experiences we've had since, to set us up to respond to stressors in certain ways. And so that's when you hear about things like fight or flight. And we can talk more about that if you want, but there are actually a few different ways that stress can show up. And so back to what you're describing, you had that experience of almost like, you had an emotional response, and then moments later, it's like you're waking up from a deep sleep, and you're like, "Oh, what happened? Who was that?"
Well, and people say that they black out.
Yeah,
They're angry and they don't remember what they said, or they don't even remember why they're fighting. But that's why, because the emotions just completely take over.
And you know, I sometimes talk with clients about viewing it as your system is being hijacked by the emotion in that moment. And the key there is not to vilify the emotion. So it's not that the emotion is the villain or the enemy. It's that you failed to ask the question of, what am I going to do now that my system is hijacked?
Right.
Because it's what you do next that can make a huge difference. And you can use that information then going forward to pre-plan. And we can talk about this too, but set yourself up so that you're way less likely to have your system hijacked by an emotion. Because again, emotions are going to come and go like the weather. It's all about how we work with them.
Yes. And one thing you mentioned was calling someone and talking to them. And I know women, once we get it off our chest, we're a lot better. It doesn't solve anything, but it helps. But we also have to be careful to make sure that we're telling the right people. We don't want to be in the Facebook group and complaining about our partner, and they go, "Yeah, he's a piece of crap. You should leave." No, you just need someone that's going to listen and hopefully tell you, "Lori, I think you might have overreacted a little bit," or let's figure out why you reacted the way you did.
I completely agree. And you can think of it as, think about sort of circle, like rings of influence outside of you. So you're standing in the center, the innermost ring. And then outside of you are like 1 or 2 other people you trust. That could include your partner, but it could also be a family member or a dear friend. And then beyond that, it might be something like your therapist or whomever. You know what all those different circles are. But when you are trying to put words to an emotional experience, I always recommend and you get really well practiced at standing firmly in that center dot first before you post in any kind of group for sure, but even before you power walk with a friend and tell them about it. Can you put in a sentence, I felt blank when?
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to just that emotional vocabulary, but being able to tease apart, was it anger or was I feeling, resentful? Was I feeling like really try to drill down to what that exactly. And I think, sometimes one that comes up a lot with stepmoms when and also, other parents in step families is we'll peel back just a little bit of the surface emotion. And beneath what they've been calling anger or hurt is feeling misunderstood, which is actually not an emotion, but it's very important information because who's misunderstanding you? What are they misunderstanding about you? And then to your point, you, once you're calm again, can take that information that you would have missed if you hadn't stood in that center circle and done that little bit of reflection, and you can take it to a calm conversation with your partner and be like, hey, I'm really feeling that you're not understanding this about where I'm coming from, or I feel like we're getting our wires crossed around this issue. What do we want to do with that? What's your perspective on this? And then you can kind of come at it from a much more strategic place.
Right. I know one of the things that we stress in the academy is the proper emotional weight, but also when you're angry, before you speak, to pause and ask yourself, is this coming from a place of love or is it coming from a place of judgment? Will my saying anything be a benefit? Usually it's not. So by the time you ask yourself these three questions, you're like, I'm not going to talk.
Forget it. Actually, yeah, no one is going to be served by me speaking up here.
Right.
Yeah. That really makes me think of the stress response, the different types of stress responses. So maybe it's helpful to touch on those a little bit, because what you're describing is sometimes the fight response. So the fight response, well, to back up, any one of us can experience any one of these responses, but what we are early conditioned to experience in light of stress, what's been modeled for us, and what we have continued to practice, whether or not it feels like we're doing it on purpose. But if you have been practiced, putting words to it is a great first step. So for each of these, I find it helpful to just name what the response is so you can kind of understand what's happening. Understand what it's designed to do, because that's the other thing. We tend to position these stress responses as opposed to us, like we're competing, we have different goals, when really your stress response is entirely orchestrated to keep you safe and protected. It's to help you live to see another day. It's just not going to be the most conducive to smooth stepfamily relationships or any kind of relationship. So the fight response, for example, is it's you defending against some kind of a threat. So the fight response made a lot of sense when our ancestors were facing some kind of a snarling animal charging at them. The fight response, the response to defend yourself, to grab some kind of a weapon, to hide, well, poor example, to fight back, made a lot of sense and suited that situation. The response is still with us. Like it's a carryover from situations where it is very helpful. And in modern day, of course, there are plenty of situations where fighting back actually is the most strategic way to respond to a stressor. The issue is when it's not so much a snarling wild animal, but a snarling member of your stepfamily, fighting back is not always going to be your best choice. And so to just put that into an example, and I'm sure you can think of so many from what you've seen in the academy and in your work with stepfamilies, but the moment your teenage stepson or son rolls his eyes at you and you feel heat rising in your chest, and suddenly you feel like you need to defend your entire existence. It's like that eye roll was a threat to your very being. You see how quickly it escalates? That is your stress response.
Yes. And it's funny that we're talking about this because I remember one time I was riding a horse with, actually it was Jackson's dad at the time, and the horse reared back and I fell off and it fell on me.
Oh my goodness.
Well, of course, in my head, I'm thinking, oh, great, the 911 videos of them lifting this dead horse off of my body. Well, the first thing I did was prayed. And then when the horse didn't just automatically lift up off of me, I'm like, okay, what's next? And then, but as soon as that horse got off of me, I ran. It wasn't a thought process. It was a reaction. And then I'd pass out. And then I'd get up and run again and I'd pass out. And that happened like 5 times, but it wasn't a thought of, oh, I need to run. Why was I running? I mean, the horse wasn't chasing me. It was just because of what had happened. It freaked me out. And my body reacted that way of run to protect me from the horse falling again or something like that. But you don't think about it.
Definitely not. As you found, it was a totally automatic. It's like some kind of mechanism was tripped inside your body that was just like, don't think, just do. And that is the perfect segue into the flight response, which is we are designed to escape emotional discomfort. Physical discomfort as well, as is the case with your situation. But oftentimes in step families, unless we're really dealing with something that is more of a physical, a threat to physical safety, that kind of a thing. But most of the time, it's a threat to our emotional comfort. And so there's something that just pulls you out of your zone of preference, how you'd like things to be. And that could be anything from the truly mundane, like you trip over someone's shoe in the entryway. Not that that's ripped straight from my own step family experience or anything.
Or mine.
But often it'll come up, so one example that I hear over and over again is when my partner and their ex are discussing step family logistics, like they're on the phone or maybe they're in person. I have this sudden need, this is what many people feel, to just exit the premises. It's not because they've asked me to leave. It's not because even they're talking about anything particularly provocative. It's more, I need to escape this situation because I feel deeply uncomfortable right now. That's a very everyday example of flight response. And then all the way up to your story, your incredible story is like truly a survival flight response. And it worked.
Yeah.
In a step family, the issue with some of these responses is not that they're ineffective. It's that there's sometimes a cost associated with that response that is too high for us. So for example, there's nothing wrong with removing yourself from an uncomfortable situation in your household. But if you're always flying out the door every single time the other household calls and there's some kind of a co-parenting discussion, of which there will be many, it might cause some friction between you and other members of the household. Or maybe you just will grow weary of having to flee your own home to escape this discomfort. And then the other, just a footnote to that, is that the more we double down on one type of stress response without intervening in some of the ways that we'll talk about, it just becomes stronger and it tends to take more and more of that response to meet the same need. So you might need to get in the car and go for a long drive every single time. And pretty soon you're needing to just flee more or fight back harder. And it just becomes unsustainable and exhausting.
Exactly.
And you might not have even felt the need. Like it might truly have felt like it was just an automatic process. And so just to normalize, Lori, that's why it can be so hard to understand, is because you're thinking, I didn't even make the choice.
Right.
I mean, yes, on some level I did, but it was not a conscious decision. And so that can make it remarkably difficult to just reflect on and figure out on your own. Some people are able to, others find real benefit in teasing that out with someone that they trust or a professional that they hire to be able to trust. That's a perfectly acceptable use of therapy, for example, of being able to sit with someone in a supportive, confidential container and let them know, hey, here's how I've always moved through the world. Here's this situation that happened, and I am puzzled by the way that it played out.
Right.
I'm really motivated to connect the dots, but I'm coming up short. That is a great way to use that kind of support, because we can't always see it because it's happened within us. That is not nearly enough distance to be able to puzzle it out on our own. It's an example of, yes, you you experienced this really difficult thing that shouldn't have happened.
Mhm.
And what's also true is that you came out through that experience, you survived that experience. And so if we're taking a purely neutral, objective, just the facts, your stress response worked in that
Right.
situation. And I
Right.
guess that's another sort of message to anyone listening to this, thinking it's really frustrating that we have these different stress responses, but they are functioning for you. It's just a question of, is there collateral damage associated? Like if my stress response that comes up over and over again in this type of step family situation, if there's too much fallout from me responding that way, then it's worth me backing up and looking at how I can intervene on that.
Yeah, I think many stepmoms need to shift from fight to flight when something's going wrong.
What I love about that is sometimes, the topic of stepping back, setting down certain responsibilities, opting out, disengaging, whatever you want to call it, gets kind of conflated with the flight response. And the main difference is that one is all about intentional control, a calm
Yes.
decision that you're making. And ideally, you're communicating something about that to your partner so that you have their support in it.
Mhm.
The other is like everyone out of my way. I'm busting through a window if I have to get out of this situation.
Right.
So one is very automatic, one is very intentional and thoughtful. But I like that you mentioned that, because more and more what I see from stepmoms in particular, again, I go back to that just because that's who I'm speaking with the most. But
Right.
I think this could be true of anyone in a step family, is the fourth stress response. And this is one that is unique because not only do we not talk about it nearly as much, but it also is very tricky because it tends to be heavily reinforced in us, meaning people don't tell us to stop doing this stress response usually. And that is the fawn response. This is the idea of over-functioning, making nice, people-pleasing to avoid conflict or rejection.
Mhm.
And boy, if that doesn't show up over and over again in the step parenting role, you're volunteering, you're baking the cookies, you overdo everything just to be accepted.
You're
And it
taking
might
over
work
the
for,
parenting. Yeah.
yep. Look at how well I can do. And again, we don't have to look far to find people who will happily reinforce that in us. It might be our partner who's like, wow, hit the jackpot with this little robot of a person or like Energizer Bunny has
Yeah.
boundless energy to show up in all these ways. Or in some cases, not all, but sometimes the other household will positively reinforce it. Sure, if you want to pick up the kids when it's not
Yeah.
even your job and it's not even your day, have at it. It's often heavily reinforced by people around us. Oh, she does it all. He's so amazing. They're super parents, super step parent. And it also tends to be heavily reinforced in other areas of our life. So if we're responding to stress by fawning in our step family, we're probably also doing it at work and in our other social circles. And so it becomes this echo chamber of people saying, yeah, keep it up. And so we almost mislabel it in our minds as a stress response. It becomes kind of part of just who we are. I'm someone who shows up for my step family
Right.
and goes the distance. And the problem is there will be a cost to that stress response. It's just most likely going to be experienced internally. So it's different in that way from the others.
Yeah, because it can quickly go to I'm helping, being kind, to I'm overwhelmed, I'm resentful.
Right. And then it can, it can devolve into these conversations with your partner, for example, where they're thinking, I never asked you to do all this. And you're thinking,
Right.
well, yeah, but you didn't rush out to stop me when I was doing it. But ultimately, it comes back to, our own personal responsibility. We have to be the ones that are ultimately in charge of how am I responding in a stressful situation, and how's that working for us?
Right. And if you're talking to somebody and you're getting that feeling, I call it the little angry man inside, like I'm getting ready to get mad, kind of thing. And you can recognize that it's coming sometimes. And I think that's important because you can stop it from overreacting, I guess is the way I'm looking at it. Because we know that if I'm upset and Dave is upset and we're both screaming at each other, nothing good is going to come of that at all.
Definitely not. And that is not only is that something every single person in a step family can relate to, I'm sure there's like heads nodding as they listen to this right now, but Also, that is heavily backed by robust research findings. There is a concept known as our window of tolerance, where biologically, as you are edging out of the window of what your system can tolerate in terms of the stressor that you're faced with, your capacity diminishes rapidly. Your capacity to have a thoughtful conversation, your capacity to connect meaningfully with the people sitting at your same table, your capacity to remember your own name, it all kind of goes away because all of these other parts of your system have been recruited immediately. It's an emergency to keep you alive. It's like, no, put that aside. We're not trying to be polite. We're not trying to ask questions. We're not trying to hear our partner's point of view. All hands on deck so that we can flee, so that we can fight back, so that we can win. Freeze. Yeah, so we can win. And again, live to see another day, whatever that looks like in a step family context. And so, yeah, it's very, it's the benefit. I mean, you could flip it and say the cost is really kind of the survival of your step family does depend on your ability to build awareness of how you're responding to stress. That's true of every member of a step family, every adult in a step family, I should say. But also, the flip side of that is that all the goodness, all the things that if you were to just brain dump everything that you want in your step family, the connection, the trust, the shared meaning, the fun times, the lightheartedness that is absent from so many step families when they're in the throes of just surviving, all of that is waiting on the other side of you being able to regulate your emotion. Because as soon as you do, all of those systems that have been recruited to keeping you alive, you get all that energy back. And suddenly you're like, oh, I can think creatively. I'm calm again. I can pay attention to what I'm doing with my face.
Right, exactly. Well, let's talk about how you regulate those emotions. What are some ways that, because a lot of times we know, like we've talked about, it's instant and you don't have a thought process to it. So what are ways that you can regulate that? I know pre-planning is a big part, right?
Really big part, yes. So when we think about regulating emotion, I would say most people, if you ask them, what does it mean to regulate your emotion? They're all zooming themselves to some imagined moment, usually from their own experience, or they're just using their imagination, where they are like standing in the thick of it. It's like in a movie where there's no like lead up to the action. They just drop you right into the scene, right in the beginning, right? That's where our minds tend to go when we think about regulating emotion, is like, oh, what do I do when I'm already angry or when I'm already threatened? But really, that is just like one little tail of the whole graph of where you can start to regulate your emotion. So let's start there and kind of work back. But there's actually, we know from research findings in emotion regulation that there are kind of 5 buckets of processes that regulate emotion. So the one that we started with, that's like right when you're feeling the emotion already, that's the way we can work with emotion at that point is called response modulation. So at that point, you have already felt the feeling, like you are already in the throes of your stress response. And your best hope in that situation is to influence your physiological or behavioral response. So that's like at work. I am going to influence the words that come out of my mouth in response to this stressful interaction because I want to stay employed.
Right.
I am going to regulate my response to this person that I'm married to, and I know that I love, but in this moment, I kind of want to fight them. I'm going to respond in a different way in this moment, even though I'm so angry, because I care about, the future of our relationship and our family.
Right.
But the point there is that, you're already in the moment. And so while, yes, there are things you can do to calm yourself, and I can share, there are so many little things that you can do. I can share for your audience, afterwards, some resources that they can use to learn some of that. But one really simple one, no one likes to hear deep breathing, but truly, before you do or say anything and you're in the moment, deep breaths to calm your body before you respond any type of way. So I usually encourage people to stand with both feet on the ground. If you're not already, if you're sitting, just make sure that you're planted and pause longer than you feel is normal before responding. So where you would normally be encouraged, you might feel compelled to cut your partner off while they're speaking. Instead, you wait a beat or two and you breathe. And you're not making a big show of it. You're not like exhaling like an animal to prove, to show them how upset you are. You're just quietly doing that. And that should already give you a little bit better shot at making a good choice of what you say or do next. So that's response modulation. That's in the moment. Backing up from there is cognitive change. This is when you have felt the emotion and it's reframing your interpretation of the situation that you're in. So it's looking at maybe a rude behavior by your stepchild when they come back to your house. It's shifting the story from they don't respect me, they're trying to be rude, and you're already starting to feel a little bit of that emotion bubble up. You shift the story to they're struggling with the transition.
Yes.
Sometimes it's helpful to call to mind data you have from the past. We struggle with transition. Transition days are kind of a challenge around here, big surprise. But simply by shifting that, depersonalizing it and making it a more neutral story about what's happening, you have a better shot at having a different emotional experience. So maybe the anger is starting to bubble up, but that kind of softens it. So it doesn't reach the same peak. Okay. So we've got what you can do when you're already at a peak in the moment. We've got changing the story, which is softening that curve of the emotion. Then you can back up even a little bit further and you're already in a situation. It's already, you're in a situation, maybe, I don't know, one that's fresh in summer that I'm hearing about a lot is like road trips or family vacations, right? Your partner has planned this beautiful trip for your family, and one of the kids is giving an eye roll or is giving attitude or speaking with a tone or is just generally unimpressed and uncooperative, right?
Yeah.
Attentional deployment is choosing in that moment to shift your focus to a different aspect of the situation.
Right.
So rather than staring in the rearview mirror at the facial expressions of the teenager in the back seat, you're looking at your partner and you are feeling appreciation for the trip that they've planned. You're maybe choosing to talk with them about, your ETA or what you're going to get for dinner. You're maybe thanking them, doing a little bit of modeling for the ungrateful rest of the family in the back of the car. I really appreciate you planning this for us. This is so great. If all of that is too hard, you can just shift your attention to something not relational. You could sing along to the music that you're listening to. You could stare out at the blue sky. It's just shifting what you're focusing on, because where you focus your attention, that grows. And pretty soon that can have a complete shift in your emotion. So see already how we're backing up and you've got more and more influence the further out you start to intervene.
Right. I know we were in church one time. I don't want you to lose your spot, but we were in church one time and they had the clicky pens. Well, I didn't notice it, but David did. So then he brought it to my attention. Well, guess what? That's all I could focus on.
Yeah, of course.
So on the prayer request, he said, get rid of the clicky pens because he could not focus after that. And it kept getting louder and louder in his head, right?
That's so real. And I mean, truly putting it into a step family perspective, there will be some situations where that is just a really tall order. You're like, I'm going to have a better shot at changing the story about the annoying thing that's happening than I will not noticing the annoying thing that's happening. So you get to decide. You can kind of think about this as plotted on a timeline, but also when you're in a situation, you can just check in with yourself. Like, what's going to be the winning strategy here? What can I actually pull off?
Right.
Because none of this is worth anything if you can't see yourself practicing it and if you're not going to follow through on it.
Right.
Because like anything else, it just gets easier with practice. So yeah, I love the clicky pen example because that could be so many different things in step family life, right?
Yeah. The kid breathing.
The kid breathing. Why must they breathe that way? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So backing up from there,
Yeah.
the second to last one, we can think of these again plotted on a timeline. So we've started at what we're doing in the moment to change how we respond to emotion. Just back from that is reframing the story we're telling ourselves about the situation. From there, we're shifting our attention to something else happening in the situation. Prior to that is what we think of as situation modification. This is altering the situation in some way to reduce emotional impact. So this is different than changing your focus. This is like you're actually orchestrating the situation a little bit differently.
Mhm.
But importantly, this category is where the situation is unavoidable. So you can't just not go to the place that's going to
Right.
cause the situation, but you can change some aspect of it. So if, for example, a co-parent has an arranged transition, like exchange of the kids in their parenting agreement, where the other parent is going to come to their home.
Mhm.
And that has so far been unsuccessful. It's caused conflict. There has been, they just camp out in the driveway and it's hard to get them to leave afterwards, whatever it might be. You might choose to modify the situation by saying, hey, let's find a neutral transition ground. So you're not, the situation still has to happen. There still has to be a changing of care for the kids, but you are amending that situation in a way that will greatly reduce you having a negative emotional experience in that situation. You're way less likely to be hijacked at like a McDonald's parking lot than you are on your own turf.
Right.
That's the idea.
Yes. All right.
And then the best one of all, the one that I think I wish way more of us took advantage of because it has so much influence over our emotional experience, is situation selection. And that's just what it sounds like. It's choosing which situations to enter or avoid. And I think this connects so well to how you and David work with step parents. It is deciding to skip an outing that always ends in conflict, always drains you. It's deciding to opt out of a set of responsibilities that to this day have never worked out for you or anybody else. And so many of us overlook that choice point. We don't think of that as emotion regulation.
Right.
And I think one of the biggest culprits for why we don't is we get caught up in the story about what it means about us if we say yes or no to that situation.
Right.
Do you agree?
Yes, 100%.
Like what kind of step parent wouldn't fill in the blank?
Yeah, wouldn't go to little Johnny's volleyball game. Well, the kind that doesn't want to sit there beside Biomom and Biomom talk about how great sex was with her ex.
Yeah, who wouldn't want that?
Yeah, I mean.
And that's where I think just really stepping back and connecting it to what is my actual goal in this role? Is my goal to check as many boxes of what a good step parent ought to do in the eyes of everybody around me?
Oh, so
most of whom I don't even know, right? I insert eye roll here. Or is my goal to connect meaningfully with these kids? Is my goal to be a supportive presence in their life? Is my goal to live a stepmom life or a parent life that I can live with, that I actually enjoy? If all of those things are my actual goals, then actually this situation that has moved me further away from those goals than closer to them, it's got to go. So that is situation selection. And that is like, if we charted the amount of influence each of these 5 choice points has on our emotional experience, that one is the lion's share. Just choosing which situations to put yourself in. But I think that's a really hopeful message because you have so much healthy control over what your emotions are going to be. We just tend to overlook that.
Yes, because we'll feel guilty if we say no. Or what is society going to think about me or my friends if I don't do this? But here's the thing. For example, like the volleyball thing. If you go into the volleyball thing as a step parent causes you stress, everybody feels it. It's not just you. Even the people sitting around you can feel something's off, right? Whereas you cannot go, nobody else is affected except for you and the child maybe. or your partner, but you can explain to the child, hey, I'm just not going to be able to make it tonight, but I wish you the best of luck. And I can't wait to hear about it when you get home. That way you're still supporting them
It's so true.
without putting yourself in we'll say it, the biomom trap, for lack of a better word.
I love it. And I think, I completely empathize with parents and step parents who are in that situation of feeling like what they suspect on some level is the right choice seems totally at odds with all the messages they're getting about what they ought to be doing.
Yeah.
And it's not helped by the fact that we have no clear consensus about what a step parent role should actually entail. It is like a blank canvas and everyone's splattering their own ideas on there. But what you can always come back to as your North Star is what you know about yourself. And that's to kind of bring it full circle back to self-awareness. That is going to be the secret sauce in thriving in your step family, because you can always trust that. I know when my system is being hijacked in my stress response. I know when, I'm going to have a really hard time in this situation telling myself a different story about what is happening or shifting my attention. And so actually the right choice for me, if I do care about showing up in a certain way, meaningfully, relationally in my step family, I've got to make this different choice. And just know that brings with it some temporary discomfort because there's a gap between the choice you're making and what everyone is telling you the right choice is. But the payoff is so much better. The payoff is peace and meaningful connection in the long run, which is like priceless.
Right. And those are all things that you can control. A lot of times growing up when you're 16 and you're having all these emotional reactions, you're like, I can't control that. You can. You can. And it amazes me. I look back 20 years ago, how I would react to something and now, and I'm like, man, I've grown up. I'm so proud of myself because it's like, even somebody riding behind you, riding your butt in the car, I can't stand it. It drives me crazy. Used to, I'd tap the brakes. Like, you go eat the butt end of this car. Now I'm like, I pull over. I'm like, have a good day. Not going to steal my joy. I'm not going to get mad because of the choices somebody else made.
That's the ultimate flex, Lori, I believe. I think, I know I think about, some of my younger stepmom clients who are, just getting started in this role. We'll talk about aspiring to be unbothered. And I love when we talk about what that means to them.
Yes.
It's all of this. It's not caring. It's not about being disinterested. It's actually aiming for something above and beyond just the approval of everybody else. Because if we're being honest, that's all we stand to gain by making a bad choice over and over again in service of other people's opinion is we've just gained their approval, which is fleeting at best.
Right.
And doesn't actually translate to what is going to help us long term. And yeah, again, like emotion regulation, this is sort of the encouragement I have to people, regardless of where they find themselves in all of this that we're talking about, is that emotion regulation gets so much easier when you're not carrying a disproportionate weight of the load of parenting responsibilities.
Amen.
When you give yourself, I thought I'd get an amen for that from you. When you can step back with intention and focus the full might of your beautiful brain and heart on the things that are actually on that short list of what's within your control, the payoff is huge. And likewise, bonding and connection are a heck of a lot easier to do when your emotions are well regulated. So it's really this self-perpetuating cycle. You get to decide whether that's a helpful cycle or whether it's one that's going to hurt you. Right. You get to intervene at all these different places. It's kind of a choose your own adventure thing, but when you start getting that wheel going of practicing this emotion regulation and making those wise choices, it will get easier and easier. And pretty 100%, soon, what becomes automatic is a strategic response, not a desperate one.
Exactly. And life seems so much calmer and enjoyable since I have become unbothered and realized what I can control.
I love that for you, and I love it for all of us. I think just as a kind of extra plug for tapping into step family support of some kind, whatever that looks like for you, is that when you are properly supported, like you have adequate spaces you can go to that aren't just an open rant on social media, but are an actual secure community, for example, or you're on a call with a coach. When you have that level of support that can bolster you appropriately, you become far less likely to need to seek the approval of faceless people out in the public.
Yeah.
I think people who are particularly prone to that, we see it a lot early on in the stepmom journey, right? Wanting to be a good stepmom specifically. But you're much more vulnerable to that because if you don't have adequate support, it's easy to interpret the feedback from other people of, oh, you're such a good fill in the blank, or it would be great if you da 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 da. Some people don't do this, but you do that. You start interpreting that as care and concern and support, and it might not be. And so you're kind of chasing this vapor, whereas when you are adequately like well supported already at a baseline, that becomes less interesting to you, what other people think about what you ought to choose. Yeah.
Because you have to realize nobody else cares about you like you need to care about you.
Yes.
And I know that we talk about this all the time. The stress can cause illness. It can cause you to be sick. I went through that. They thought I had pancreatic cancer, but it was stress. It was stress. I had lost 30-something pounds in a month. My eyes were all caved in and all that stuff. It was stress.
Yeah. We're learning so much about the impact of all of this. I mean, we've been talking about it, obviously, for the function it can serve in the here and now in our step families. But again, back to that proverbial long game. Ideally, you are around and feeling great, and your partner is for as long as you want to be. And a major factor in that is how you are working with stress here and now. And so, from everything from your immune system to digestion to sleep. I mean, there's a ton of research that's just piling up on how our ability to intervene at all these different points with our stress response just pays huge dividends for our health. Yeah.
100%. Actually, I had a friend that was a gynecologist, and she tells her patients, if you're coming in for your yearly checkup, don't come if you're stressed, because your body can normally fight off certain things. But if you're stressed, you don't have that strength to fight off stuff. So you could have a pap smear come back abnormal. Whereas if you waited 2 days when you're not as stressed, it could come back normal. And then also another doctor, he does a lot with breast cancer and ovarian cancer. And he talks about how much the positiveness and not being negative as far as, oh, I've got this and I'm dying, but the positive outlook and also that control of the stress impacts you greatly on how your body goes with healing that.
I really appreciate that you bring that up, because sometimes I think people hear emotion regulation and they either think suppressing all emotion, which we've already talked about, that's not what it means, or they think it's suppressing bad emotion, it's suppressing negative emotion. And that's when we edge into the realm of toxic positivity of like, everything's fine, nothing to see here, it's all good, which is totally not our goal either. But what you're hitting on is our ability to make our way back to a productive baseline, like make our way through the very real anger, frustration, fear, all of those emotions that will naturally come up. You can work all the stuff we're talking about and you're still going to experience these things because you have a pulse.
Right.
When you let that emotion come and you work with it in the ways that we're talking about, your ability to then regulate yourself back to a baseline is absolutely predictive of all these great health outcomes.
Right.
But we tend to and so when we think about positive emotion, that's really what we're talking about, is that sort of forward-focused, adaptive sort of position. It's not just about being, quote, happy, especially in the, in really challenging circumstances. It's about believing in our ability to regulate ourselves back to calm. That is everything.
Yes. Yes. And it's so important to be able to do that, especially as a step parent.
Yeah.
And the more that we as parents and step parents and adults in general can be this way, the more kids can learn from us.
They're watching how we're working through stress. And sometimes, I'm not sure if you hear this from the parents that you work with, sometimes I'll get questions about, is it all right to show our stress in front of the kids? Obviously, we're not talking about, most people know better than to disparage the other parent in front of the kids or anything like that.
Punch holes in the wall. Yeah.
Right. But is it okay? Some people have a lot of concern about, is it traumatizing the kids for them to see when I'm feeling anxious about something? It might not even be step family related, just having an anxious day. Or if they see me down, will that negatively influence them in some way? And again, the key is modeling for them.
Yes.
I can feel this way and come out the other side because I'm choosing to do X, Y, and Z, because I'm paying attention to X, Y, and Z, because I'm approaching my own emotions with curiosity and kind of a learner's mindset. That's a wonderful skill set to model for kids. So I don't think people need to be fearful of that. I think it's just as you said, it's an opportunity to model for them because they're going to have to do it for their whole lives too.
Right. And you see so many kids that they're like, I never knew my parents didn't get along because they didn't show any emotion.
Yeah.
And I think it's important, and we'll end with this, is I think it's important. It's not necessarily putting in more positive. It's getting rid of the negative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because you can blow smoke all day long and it's not going to change anything.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Yep. All right, Michaela, I could keep you here forever, but we got work to do. We got to save the world, right?
Go team. Yeah.
Yes, go team. Well, we'll have you back soon, I'm sure. And as always, it was great.
Thank you so much.
And
yeah, it was a total treat.
Send me those resources. And
I will. I think what I'll do is I'll put together a special page for your audience, and then we'll just wrangle everything together. I'll include some notes about the topics we've talked about, maybe some recommended readings, and then even some scripts just to help you work through some of those 5 different choice points we're talking about, questions you can ask yourself. So
exactly. Well, thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds great.
Thanks.
All right, folks. Thanks for listening. We appreciate it. And remember that life is good.
And it really is when you nacho.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Nacho Kids Podcast. Find us online at nachokids.com. Until next time, remember, life is good when you nacho.